I just touched on this notion of like, like couples like going into like their first pregnancy and the excitement of having their first baby and so forth as being sort of ill prepared for what's ahead, reminded me of something that I was really, really struck by. I just want to tell you this story. I was at the mall in Jersey City, place I really don't like being, but somehow I was there. I think that's like one of the few places you can go see a movie pretty easily. But anyway, I'm there and I see this girl online for ice cream, and she's cradling a little baby. And it just struck me as weird because first of all, she looked really young, and second of all, it was weird to just hold the baby like this without like a carrier or a sling or something like that. So I kind of peered around to look at the baby's face, and lo and behold, it was not a baby, it was a doll. And, I knew that she wasn't a teenager who had some sort of like dysfunction that made her carry around baby dolls to the mall with her. So I assumed correctly that it was part of a health project. So I just kind of stepped in and I said, "Oh wow, is this one of those babies that you have to take care of, as part of your class project?" And she said, "Yeah, it is." She's like, I was lucky enough to get him for they were on break during this time over like Christmas break, and I was like, wow, I think that's such a great idea because like, what does this baby do? Like, does it cry and stuff? And she's like, oh yeah, it's got a computer in it and it registers your reactions. I'm like, wait a minute, so you can't just like, you couldn't go to the mall today and leave your baby at home, stuff him in a closet or something? She's like, oh no, because he would cry, he would need things, and it would be recorded that I hadn't tended to him. So then her friend showed me this ring of keys. There were these kind of like odd shaped keys, and each one represented a different need for the baby. There was a diaper change or feeding or just being held or needed to go to sleep. Like all the different things that you like run through when you have a newborn to try and fix the situation. You would have to like put the key in and see if that worked. I mean, a lot easier on a baby doll than on a real newborn, but I was fascinated by that. And then she told me that she was one of the people in the class who got a crack baby, not just a regular newborn, but a crack baby doll. And the difference in the crack baby doll was that it had like a weaker neck. You know how like babies, like sick babies don't have good muscle tone. So this baby had like a really floppy head, and somehow that factored into like how you took care of it. And it was more cranky. It cried more frequently and so on. And I'm like, wait, so this baby wakes you up in the middle of the night too? And she's like, mm-hmm. And she didn't look happy about it, but I was like, wow. So I was like, does this work? I mean, do you think this is a good project for teenagers in terms of deterring them from actually going through with having a baby if they got pregnant? And she's like, oh yeah, she's like, I've only got this baby for 2 weeks and this has already been like a big pain. So anyway, I was thinking about that and thinking like what a great project it was for teenagers, but then I was like, why don't they do the same thing for adults going through like a childbirth education class? How, like how beneficial would it be to actually go home with a newborn that's going to cry and wake you up at night, and you're going to have to go through all these things, to figure out how to fix it? I mean, it would give people like just a little bit of an inkling of what it is like, because I really think that, for the most part, people don't quite know, they never know what they're getting into. I mean, you could talk about it, all day to people, or they could sit there and like, babysit for their nephew or their cousin or what have you, but you'll never get a sense of how completely exhausting and demanding it is to have your own baby, and and what that's like. So I'm all in favor of these computer chip baby dolls being a part of the childbirth education for adults. So Anyway, speaking of pregnancy and so forth, I just on an impulse, I picked up this book. I'm going to show it to you. Down Came the Rain. Can you see that without the glare on it? Yes, folks, that is Brooke Shields' profile. Now, one of my friends sort of criticized me, like thinking that this was some sort of a sensational celebrity story, which is kind of funny because I couldn't care less that it's Brooke Shields. It was more that like I was interested in hearing someone's personal memoir of what postpartum depression was like. It's actually not, that it's Brooke Shields is sort of beside the point. But this was a really compelling book. I read it in like 2 days. It was a fast read, and it was really fascinating. And I recommend it for any parent, especially if you're thinking of having, if you didn't go through it, perhaps, hopefully if you didn't go through it with any of your children. What am I trying to say? I don't know, like in preparation for having a child, whether it's your first or subsequent children, it's just an interesting thing to read. And in a way, I feel like it's more important for other people to read, like the people around you. For example, your partner or your family or something, in the sense that recognizing postpartum depression is pretty tricky. And like she explains in the book, most people have this notion of postpartum depression as what you hear in the media, which is more postpartum psychosis. Those are the stories that, that make it into the news, where a mother does some sort of, horrific act towards her children, either hurting them or, in some extreme cases, killing them. And, that's an extremely small percentage. We're talking about a psychosis versus just a disorder, just sort of typical postpartum depression. So that's one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum is more what people like to call baby blues. After you have a baby, your hormones shift in such a significant way. It's a little bit like having PMS, and you tend to feel a bit melancholy, a bit unsure of yourself, sometimes a little depressed, sometimes not terribly confident about what you're doing as a parent. It can manifest itself in a bunch of different ways, even sort of irritability, indecisiveness, like all of those kind of things. So that's at the smaller end of the spectrum. I don't mean the smaller end of the spectrum, but it's at the other end of the spectrum of the psychosis. And I don't want to say smaller because it's much more typical to go through those kind of things, to go through those feelings. And they're sort of short-lived. You may experience that for a week or 2 weeks or something. But true postpartum depression is its own animal, and it persists. There's a way to define it. It has to do with like when the onset is, how long it lasts, and how dysfunctional the mother feels. So in poor Brookie's case, she was really in bad shape and she could not stop crying. She just was absolutely just overtaken by it, just crying and out of sorts, and felt like a failure, and had this inability to bond with her baby, which I also thought was really interesting, because I wonder, and this is not something that they talk about all that much in childbirth preparation classes, I wonder how most women feel that they're supposed to feel once they have a baby. I think that there's this assumption that you have this, this baby comes out of you and suddenly you are filled with this undying, unconditional love for a baby. And I wonder how many times that's actually the case, because I think in a lot of women that I've spoken to, there's a weird sense of, I mean, certainly there are women who truly fall in love with their babies, like the second they're born. But I think sometimes there's this sort of like growing on you phase. And really what, like, I remember one friend of mine uh, expressing it so beautifully. She said,